Have you ever wondered if there was an African country that was not colonized? Well, both Ethiopia and Liberia fit this description, but Ethiopia for different reasons than Liberia. So Liberia had already been set up as a recognized nation state by the United States prior to the European scramble for Africa, which is basically when Europe decided to try to colonize all of the African nations. So even though Liberia was a country that was created by freed American enslaved persons, its capital was named after a United States president, Monroe, and its capital is Monrovia. Its flag looks very similar to the U.S., as you can see right here, and English is its national language. It still technically was not colonized, as the citizens were from America and they had been there for generations, and almost all of them weren't actually ethnically Liberian and actually just came from the United States. Ethiopia, on the other hand, has a vast history that has to do with its geography, and one major reason it was able to avoid colonization actually has to do with why it's in a conflict with Sudan and Egypt right now. So looking at an Ethiopian topographic map, it tells you a lot more than it would from looking at a regular map, because you can see the sheer amount of mountains and mountain ranges in the nation. The Ethiopian highlands in itself account for 50 of the 100 highest peaks in Africa, and most Ethiopians live in these highlands, or at least in the valleys in between. And even the capital, Addis Ababa, is located in the highlands. And Addis Ababa is actually the fourth highest capital in the world at 2,355 meters tall. Throughout our history, mountains have been the best way to protect yourself from invaders, and this can be seen from countries like Switzerland, who was able to avoid many of Europe's wars, and countries like Nepal and Bhutan, which were able to remain independent due to the Himalayas. Ethiopia is the most protected nation in the continent of Africa. While mountains protect from invasion, coastlines do the exact opposite. Ethiopia doesn't even have a coastline, or at least they don't anymore. So for centuries, Eritrea, which is Ethiopia's northern neighbor, was under control of the kingdom of Aksum, which was later modern-day Ethiopia. In the 1500s, the Ottoman Empire invaded northern Ethiopia, and most of what is now modern-day Eritrea. Ethiopia, having a large population and abundant resources, was a huge target for European colonization, and Ethiopia's surroundings were quickly colonized during the European scramble for Africa in the 1880s. So the British claimed Egypt, Sudan, Uganda, and Kenya. The French claimed Djibouti. The Italians took Eritrea from the Ottomans, and Somalia, parts of it belonged to the British, parts of it belonged to the Italians. In 1889, Italy also took southern Eritrea from the Ethiopians in an 1889 treaty. This was called the Treaty of Wikale. Remember that, because I'll get back to it. However, because of the Ethiopian highlands, it was almost impossible to invade. And another benefit for the Ethiopians were its rivers, which were a result of its mountains. So during the rainy season, Ethiopia's rivers, as you can see from this image, are almost overfilled. However, in the dry season, it's a lot different. The rivers were pretty much unusable, but the Europeans did try, and especially the Italians. Now remember that 1889 treaty, the Treaty of Wikale, where Italy claimed southern Eritrea from the Ethiopians? Well, they also claimed that Ethiopia was a protectorate of the Italians, and this simply was not true. The Ethiopians and Italians fought a battle over this in 1896 called the Battle of Adwa, and the Ethiopians easily won. Fast forward to 1936, and the Italians did actually successfully invade Ethiopia due to modern-day military equipment and especially an air force. But this occupation only lasted 5 years. This is not considered a colonization of Ethiopia, simply an occupation, and so Ethiopia still remained one of two African countries to not be colonized. Now, in modern-day Ethiopia, the rainfall is still very seasonal, and during the dry season, this is a big challenge for the population because it is drastically increasing and water is becoming increasingly scarce. However, 90% of the water in the Nile actually still comes from Ethiopia, in this blue Nile section right here. Most people don't initially realize this, but the Nile actually flows upwards from the blue Nile all the way out into the Mediterranean, rather than coming down from the Mediterranean towards Ethiopia. So, for this reason, Sudan and Egypt rely on this water coming from the Blue Nile in Ethiopia. In fact, 93% of all fresh water in Egypt comes from Lake Nasser on the Nile, which is an Egyptian reservoir. So, you can see how much the Blue Nile and Ethiopia impact Egypt and Sudan's water. For decades, water in Ethiopia has freely flown towards Sudan and Egypt, but because Ethiopia now has over 100 million people, they cannot simply rely on seasonal rainfall, and during the dry season, water is very scarce. So in 2011, they constructed the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is the third largest reservoir on the planet. This severely threatens Egypt and Sudan's water supply, and this has caused a great deal of tension in the area. Ethiopia is now in the process of filling the dam for the fifth time, which Egypt and Sudan still greatly oppose, and this will end in September. There still remains a great deal of tension in this region of the world. If you found this video informative, please be sure to like and subscribe because I'll be talking more about borders like these. Thank you.